By the time the judge asked the old man to stand, blood was already drying in the white roots of his hair, and the cop who had shoved him was still smiling like he had only brushed dust off his sleeve. I remember the exact sound the cane made when it skidded across the courtroom floor, hit the wooden barrier, and spun in a slow circle that felt longer than a prayer. 3 minutes later, that same officer was staring at the door as if death itself had put a hand on the knob, because a tall man in a dark federal suit stepped inside, flashed a badge, and said, very quietly, "I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Isaiah Brooks. The man you assaulted is my father." But that came later. It had started the previous Thursday with a phone call I almost ignored. My name was Lena Brooks, and at that point, I still believed humiliation came in small doses, like bitter medicine, and that if you swallowed it fast enough, you could get on with your day. I ran the clerk's intake window at Municipal Court, the one people approached with shaking hands, unpaid tickets, eviction papers, and court dates written on wrinkled envelopes. My father, Harold Brooks, came in every other morning with me even when I told him not to, carrying his old walnut cane with the silver handle and a paper cup of coffee he swore tasted better if bought from the cart on Jefferson instead of brewed at home. "That cart man burns it on purpose," I'd tell him, wrinkling my nose as the smell of over-roasted beans filled the car. "That's because you're young," Daddy would say with a grin, tapping the lid twice with one finger. "Young people don't understand that good coffee ought to fight back." He was 74 then, slim in the shoulders, straight in the back, stubborn in every bone God had left him. He still ironed his own shirts, still shined his shoes on Sunday nights, and still spoke with the calm, deliberate courtesy of a man raised by people who had learned to survive by controlling every visible emotion. When he folded his napkin at breakfast, he folded it exactly twice. When he set down his keys, he aligned them with the edge of the table. The cane had belonged to my grandfather after a factory injury, then to my father after a knee replacement, and in our family, it had never meant weakness. It meant a man stayed standing anyway. Those mornings had a rhythm so familiar I stopped noticing how much I leaned on it. The kitchen radio whispered old soul songs through static while I buttoned my blouse and sorted files into my tote. Daddy would butter his toast all the way to the corners, never missing a spot, and ask the same questions in the same order. "Lunch packed?" he'd murmur, sliding his glasses up with one knuckle. "Keys? Badge? Patience?" I'd snort and answer, "No, yes, barely," and he'd chuckle into his coffee as though the joke had been invented fresh each time. The courthouse was only 15 minutes away, and most days the ride was quiet in the easy way only old love between family can be. Not loud love, not sentimental love, but worn smooth from years of surviving rent notices, funerals, layoffs, and the special exhaustion that comes from being black in a city that preferred to congratulate itself for progress rather than practice it. Daddy liked to point out brick buildings older than both of us and tell me who used to own the barber shop on the corner, or which church basement had fed half the block one winter. I used to tease him that he narrated the city like it was his private museum. "It is," he'd say, eyes forward. "I paid for most of it in taxes and patience." Officer Daniel Mercer entered that rhythm so gradually I didn't see the shape of him at first. He was white, broad across the chest, always too polished for municipal duty, with a haircut sharp enough to look rehearsed, and the bland kind of smile people trusted because they mistook neatness for decency. The first time he came to my window, he leaned one forearm on the ledge and said, "You always this efficient, Ms. Brooks? Or am I catching a special performance?" He said it lightly, almost flirtatious, and I answered lightly too, because women who work public desks learn to turn discomfort into paperwork. "Depends," I told him, stamping a filing date. "You bringing complete forms, Officer Mercer?" He laughed, low and confident. "For you? I'll try to be on my best behavior." Daddy noticed him long before I admitted I did. One afternoon, Mercer held the side door open for us, but he didn't look at my father when Daddy thanked him. His gaze stayed on me, sliding past the old man like he was part of the wall. In the parking lot, Daddy settled into the passenger seat with unusual care and buckled himself in before speaking. "That one smiles with his teeth," he said, staring through the windshield. "Not with his eyes." I rolled mine, started the engine, and said, "You don't trust anybody in a tight haircut?" Daddy turned the silver handle of his cane once between his palms. "No," he said softly. "I don't trust men who decide too quickly who deserves to be seen." For a while, Mercer stayed in the category of courthouse nuisance. Too familiar, too present, always appearing beside the metal detector or near the copy room, with some remark balanced on the edge between charm and intrusion. "Working late again?" he asked me one evening as I gathered folders. A pretty woman shouldn't be the last one in a building full of desperate men. The fluorescent lights hummed over us, and something in the phrasing made my skin pull tight across my shoulders. "Then maybe assign better staffing," I replied, keeping my tone flat. He tilted his head, smiling as if I'd flirted back. "Feisty. I like that." Behind him, the janitor's cart squeaked down the corridor, and I remember thinking that if a sentence could leave a greasy residue in the air, his had. Still, I rationalized. People did that when bad behavior came in civilized packaging. He never touched me then, never raised his voice, never said anything so blatant I could hand it to HR like a smoking gun. He just asked too many questions. Was my father always with me? Did I live alone? Did I own the house on Mulberry, or was it still in a parent's name? Each question wore the costume of casual conversation, and each answer I gave felt harmless until later, when I understood he had not been making small talk. He had been taking measurements. The first moment I should have understood came on a Monday, and I can still hear the stale rattle of the vending machine in the employee hall. I had stepped away from my desk to grab crackers because I'd skipped lunch, and when I turned the corner I heard Mercer's voice before I saw him. "No, not the daughter," he muttered, low and impatient. "The father. He signs things. He still drives? Good. Then he's competent enough on paper." My hand froze around the coin slot. There was a pause, then his voice again, flatter now. I said wait until after arraignment. If we push too soon, she'll get suspicious. By the time I came into view, he had his phone in his pocket and a smile back on his face like a switch had been flipped. "You all right there, Lena?" he asked. The crackers jammed halfway down the spiral, and I heard myself say, "Just tired," though the metal taste of fear had already begun coating the back of my tongue. That night I told myself I had misheard. People say strange things out of context in a courthouse. Competency hearings, signatures, arraignments. Half our building was made of words that sounded sinister if you stacked them wrong. Daddy was at the stove when I got home, frying catfish in a black skillet that popped and hissed little bursts of oil onto the range. The smell of cornmeal and pepper filled the kitchen, familiar and warm, and for 10 full seconds I almost let that erase everything. "You look pinched," he said without turning. "Somebody dead?" "Only my patients," I answered, washing my hands longer than necessary. He glanced at me over one shoulder, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. "That courthouse got a way of making lies sound official. Don't let it follow you home." I almost told him then. Instead, I asked whether he had received any calls I didn't know about, and he frowned as he set fish onto paper towels. "Calls from who?" "I don't know. Insurance, maybe? Legal something." He shut off the burner and faced me fully, dish towel in hand. "Lena, if there's something on your mind, don't lace it with sugar." I leaned on the counter because my knees had started that faint, disloyal trembling they get when fear arrives before logic. "Mercer was talking to someone. He mentioned you. Said you signed things." Daddy's face changed in a quiet way. Not shock exactly. More like a curtain drawing closed. "That boy been asking around me too," he said after a moment. "Asked about my army years, my pension, whether I still handled my own accounts. I told him my business was old enough to vote and didn't need his supervision." The house went still around us. The refrigerator hummed. Oil ticked in the cooling pan. I stared at him and felt a thin, cold trail move down my spine despite the heat from the stove. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He folded the dish towel once, then again, buying time with his hands the way he always did when something mattered. "Because I wanted to see whether it was clumsy curiosity or deliberate trespass," he said. "And because I did not want to hand that man power by naming him too early. I remember gripping the edge of the counter so hard the laminate dug crescents into my palms. Right then, I still believed naming him might somehow keep him small. 2 days later, I found the first piece of paper. That scene lives in my body now with the precision of injury. I'd gone into Daddy's den to leave his blood pressure refill on the desk, and the room held its usual smells: old paper, lemon oil from the bookshelf, the faint medicinal sweetness of the muscle rub he used on rainy days. His desk drawer was slightly open, no more than an inch, and inside I saw a cream envelope with the court's logo printed in the top left corner. At first, I thought it was one of my files misplaced in the wrong room. Then I noticed Daddy's name typed across the front and the word "Notice" stamped in red. My fingers shook before I touched it, though I still didn't know why. The paper felt expensive, thicker than ordinary mail, almost waxy at the edges. I slid out the first page and saw a hearing date. My eyes moved down too fast, snagging on phrases before my mind could assemble them. Petition for review, elder financial vulnerability, temporary conservatorship request. Only when I reached the signature line did the room seem to tilt sideways. Filed in support. Officer Daniel Mercer, affiant. Supplemental statement. Patricia Green, community advocate. And below that, in a cramped script I recognized with a jolt like a dropped elevator, the witness signature of our own church deacon, Leon Price. For a second I heard nothing at all. Not the air vent, not the traffic outside, not the thump of my own pulse. Then sound rushed back in ugly and distorted. The clock on the wall too loud, a dog barking 3 houses away, the crackle of the page in my hands as my grip tightened without permission. The document claimed Daddy was increasingly confused, vulnerable to coercion, and in need of supervised management of his property and pension disbursements pending review. It cited observed instability and concerning agitation around courthouse interactions. On the last page was a typed notation that the officer had expressed concern for my possible undue influence over my father's financial decisions. For 3 full breaths, I tried to force some sane explanation into those lines. Clerical mix-up, maybe? Malicious prank? Some other Harold Brooks? Then I saw our address. When Daddy came in from the yard, I was still standing there with the pages spread across the desk like evidence from a crime scene. He looked at my face, looked at the papers, and didn't ask what was wrong. He set the pruning shears down by the door with almost ceremonial care, rested both hands on the silver head of his cane, and exhaled through his nose. "So," he said quietly. He moved. The calm in his voice scared me more than panic would have. "Moved," I repeated, and my own voice came out scraped raw. "He's trying to take your house." Daddy crossed the room slowly, every step precise. "Not just the house," he said. "Control. Men like that always reach for the thing underneath the thing." I slapped the papers once with the back of my hand, not from anger exactly, but because I needed to feel something solid. "And Leon signed this? Deacon Leon?" My throat burned so sharply I had to swallow twice. Daddy lowered himself into the desk chair and removed his glasses, polishing them with the hem of his shirt as if that old ritual might buy us another minute of ordinary life. "Leon has debts," he said. "Patricia Green likes microphones and committees. Mercer likes authority. Everybody's got a reason." I stared at him. "You knew they were circling?" He put the glasses back on and met my eyes. "I knew someone was testing the fence. I didn't know the whole pack had shown up. The next day I confronted Patricia Green first because rage prefers easy targets, and she was both visible and vain. She ran the senior outreach nonprofit that partnered with the court on paper, but mostly fed grant money into glossy brochures and photo ops. Her office smelled like vanilla candles and printer toner, a combination so sweet it made my teeth ache. When I laid the petition on her desk, she didn't even pretend surprise. She adjusted her scarf, pressed her lips together in a performance of concern, and said, "Lena, I was hoping we could discuss this compassionately." The word compassionately hit me like spit. "Compassion?" I said, and my voice was so steady it frightened me. "You signed a document calling my father incompetent." Patricia folded her manicured hands. "I signed a referral based on concerning observations from a law enforcement officer and from members of your own community." "Which observations?" I asked. "Name one that isn't a lie." She inhaled delicately, as though my anger were giving off smoke. "Your father appeared disoriented outside court last month." I laughed, one hard sound. "He was dizzy because he'd given blood that morning. I was there." She looked past me toward her office window, not at me. In that evasive little shift of her pupils, I felt the first clean snap of illusion. She knew. I leaned closer until the edge of her perfume turned chemical in my nose. "Did Mercer tell you there was property involved?" I asked. "Did he mention the pension? The house? Did he tell you he'd been asking whether the deed was still in my father's name?" Patricia's jaw tightened for the first time. "Lower your voice," she murmured, fingers flattening on the desk. "There are procedures." "No," I said. "There's a plan. And you're in it." She finally looked at me then, and her own politeness slid enough to show the hard machinery beneath. "You'd be wise not to make accusations you can't prove," she said, each word clipped clean. "Courts take a dim view of emotional daughters interfering with elder protection." Behind me, someone in the outer office coughed, then went silent. Witnesses, even accidental ones, change the temperature of a room. I gathered the papers, keeping my hands from shaking through force alone. "Then I'll come back with proof," I told her. "And when I do, don't call it emotion." Mercer did not wait for me to find him. He found me first, at my own car, as though the building had delivered my location straight into his hand. The parking garage was half empty and echoed in that ugly concrete way that makes every footstep sound like pursuit. He stood beside my driver's door with his thumbs hooked in his belt, relaxed enough to be insulting. "Heard you paid Patricia a visit," he said. "That wasn't smart." I stopped 3 feet away, keys biting into my palm. "Neither is filing lies under oath." He smiled without warmth. "Careful. Defamation's expensive." I should have walked away. Instead, I stepped closer. Close enough to smell mint over coffee and the starch in his uniform. "Why my father?" I asked. "Why not pick somebody without a daughter who knows how court records work?" His gaze sharpened, and for the first time, I saw the contempt underneath the practiced smoothness. "Because your father is exactly the kind of man people stop defending once the right language gets attached," he said softly. "Agitated, elderly, non-compliant. You'd be amazed what concern can do in writing." Heat surged up my neck so fast I almost swayed. "You're sick," I said. He tilted his head. "No, I'm experienced. And here's some free advice, Lena. Stop digging before somebody decides you're the unstable one in that family." My breath shortened into little dry pulls. I could feel my pulse in my gums, a brutal pounding that made my teeth ache. "Are you threatening me?" I asked. He took one lazy step nearer, lowering his voice until it almost disappeared under the buzz of the overhead lights. "I'm reminding you that systems are built by people," he murmured. "People talk. Files move. Reputations bend. Your father has a hearing Friday. Best thing you can do is tell him to cooperate." Then he glanced at the cane lying on the back seat through the car window and smirked. "A man his age should know when to sit down." I do not remember unlocking the car. I remember only that my hand missed the handle twice before I got it open, and that once I was inside, I had to place both palms flat on the steering wheel, because they were shaking so violently the keys rattled against the console. The garage smelled of exhaust and damp cement, and I sat there with the windows up, swallowing air that felt too thin. His words kept replaying, but not the threat, not even the hearing. It was the tone on sit-down that kept scraping through me, because by then I knew this had never been just greed. The paperwork was a weapon, yes, but the pleasure underneath it was older, meaner, and intimately familiar. At home, Daddy listened without interrupting, standing by the sink with his sleeves rolled and his reading glasses still on from the newspaper. When I finished, he turned off the faucet and dried his hands in slow, deliberate strokes. "Then we stop hoping decency will slow him down," he said. "We treat this like what it is." I paced from the stove to the fridge and back, my shoes sticking faintly on one tile where the linoleum always lifted in humidity. "What is it?" I demanded. "A land grab? A harassment case? Corruption?" Daddy took up the cane, not leaning on it, just holding it upright like punctuation. "Predation," he answered. "And pride. Worst mix there is." Then he said something that made the room narrow around me. Call Isaiah. I stopped moving. We had not used my brother's name in that tone for almost a year. Isaiah was my father's son from his first marriage, 12 years older than me. Federal through and through, measured, disciplined, impossible to rattle. He had become a deputy U.S. Marshal 2 decades earlier, and while he loved us, his work had carved caution into him so deeply that every conversation felt half redacted. After our mother died, he and Daddy had fought over everything from funeral costs to whether Daddy should still be living alone. They had patched it up in public and never truly repaired it in private. Daddy, I said carefully, you know he'll turn this into war? Daddy looked at me with a weariness so old it seemed inherited. Baby, he said, that man already declared it. For realism, the courthouse background here reflects the U.S. Marshal Service's role in protecting the federal judicial process and federal court facilities in the United States. I called Isaiah that same night, and he picked up on the first ring as if he had been waiting. That alone unsettled me. My brother never grabbed the phone before the third ring, an old habit bought with years of federal caution. Lena. His voice came through flat and tight the way it got when he was already working a problem before I finished explaining it. You know, I said. Not a question. A silence just long enough to confirm it. I've known for 11 days, he said. I was trying to confirm a second name before I called you. My stomach dropped. You were watching and didn't tell me? I was building a case, he said with the patient precision that had always maddened me as a child and terrified me now. There's a difference. Mercer has done this twice before in different jurisdictions. First time the family folded. Second time the old man died before anything went to court and the property transferred in probate. Both times he had a local nonprofit as cover and a court employee as inside access. The refrigerator hummed behind me. The clock above the stove read 11:47. Patricia Green, I said. And someone in the filing department. The petition moved through intake without the required elder advocacy review. Somebody let it slide. I pressed my free hand flat against the tile countertop, needing something cold. Deacon Leon? Borrowed money from a man connected to Mercer's brother-in-law, Isaiah said. The signature was the repayment. He paused. I'm sorry, Lena. I know Leon baptized you. That detail hit somewhere below the sternum. Not a sharp pain, but a slow, spreading one, like cold water filling a room from the bottom. I stood very still while it rose. Friday, I said finally. The hearing is Friday. I know. Can you get Dad to court? He'll walk there barefoot before he misses his own hearing, I said. Something that was not quite a laugh passed through the line. Don't tell him everything yet. Tell him I'm coming. That'll be enough. When I relayed the message to Daddy, standing in the doorway of his room, him already in his robe with the news on low, he said nothing for a long moment. He reached over and turned the television off. He's coming to court, he asked. To mine? Yes, I said. Daddy looked at the blank screen. Good, he said softly. Just that word, but it carried the weight of every year those two men had circled each other like planets with a broken orbit trying to find the original pull. I did not sleep that night. I watched each hour change on the microwave display from the couch, a mug of tea going cold in my lap that I never once lifted. I thought about Patricia Green's vanilla-scented office and how the word compassionate had come out of her mouth like a garnish on a poisoned plate. I thought about Deacon Leon squeezing Daddy's shoulder at Easter and calling him the real pillar of this community, while already having signed the paper that called him unstable. The cold tea finally spilled when I shifted, spreading dark across the cushion, and I watched it soak in without moving. Around 4 a.m, a different kind of quiet settled in me. Not peace, nothing like peace, but something colder and more useful. The trembling in my hands stopped. I went to the desk and pulled out a legal pad and wrote in a deliberate column everything I knew, every date, document, and name. I drew lines from Patricia Green to the grant cycle her nonprofit ran through the city council. I drew a line from Mercer to the 2 prior cases. When I looked at the finished page, it was no longer a tangle of betrayals. It was a map. Maps tell you which roads lead in and which ones lead out. At 6, I showered and put on the black blouse and charcoal blazer I wore on days I had to testify. I made Daddy's coffee, the cheap cart kind, and set it beside his morning medicine. When he came downstairs in his good gray suit, shoes polished to a quiet shine, he looked at the coffee and then at me and said, "You didn't sleep." I said, "No, sir." He sat down and wrapped his hands around the cup. "Good," he said. "Tired people make sentimental decisions. Rested people make wise ones. Did you stay tired or get wise?" I looked at the legal pad folded in my tote bag. "I got wise," I told him. The courthouse that Friday smelled the same as every other morning. Old carpet, industrial cleaner, the staleness of a building that processed too much human misery through too few vents. We arrived 40 minutes early. Patricia Green was already seated at the petitioner's table in a burgundy blazer, flanked by a young attorney whose suit was slightly too large in the shoulders. Mercer stood near the side door, out of uniform, in a navy sport coat. He saw us come in, and his expression did not change. He was not worried. He should have been. At 8:52, 8 minutes before the scheduled start, the door at the back opened. I knew those footsteps, that even stride with no wasted motion, the walk of a man who moved through courthouses the way other people move through their own homes. Daddy turned, and for a moment his face did something I hadn't seen it do in years. It broke open just briefly before he pulled it back to composure. Isaiah settled into the seat beside him, looked forward at the bench, and murmured, "You look good, old man." Daddy cleared his throat. "You look late." 8:52 is 8 minutes before 9, Isaiah replied. "That is not late." Daddy said nothing, but his right hand, resting on the silver head of the cane, eased out until it pressed once against Isaiah's knee, a small thing lasting half a second, and Isaiah let it. Isaiah wore his federal credentials on his belt, visible, as he had every right to do in any court facility in the country. He carried a slim navy folder that he set on the bench beside him, with the quiet precision of a man laying down a very specific card. Patricia Green's attorney opened with the standard language: concern for a vulnerable adult, pattern of confusion, financial exposure, petition for temporary conservatorship. He spoke without visible discomfort, the way people do when they have rehearsed an argument so many times it stops feeling connected to anything real. When he said the words elder financial vulnerability, I saw Daddy's jaw tighten once, one muscle moving beneath the skin, before he smoothed it back to stillness. Then Judge Harrington looked up. "Is the subject of this petition present?" Daddy rose with his cane. "Harold Everett Brooks, present." Our attorney, Ms. Reyes, whom I had called from a parking lot 2 miles away so Mercer wouldn't see me, stepped through the door at that precise moment in a dark pantsuit, set her briefcase on the respondent's table without hurry, and the snap of those latches opening was the best sound I had heard in 4 days. What followed was quiet and methodical, and therefore more devastating than anything loud. Ms. Reyes presented Daddy's physician's assessment confirming full cognitive competency. She presented his bank records showing orderly account management for 24 months. Then she turned to Mercer's affidavit. "Your Honor, the affiant describes an incident of concerning agitation on October 14th outside courtroom 3. Mr. Brooks was not at this courthouse on October 14th. He was at a cardiology follow-up at Mercy General, documented here." She placed the page before the clerk. "The affidavit contains a fabricated witness event." The room went very still. Patricia Green's attorney leaned in and whispered something. Patricia went rigid. Isaiah opened his navy folder then. He passed it to Ms. Reyes, who reviewed one page and nodded. "Additionally, Your Honor, this matter is also the subject of an ongoing inquiry by the Department of Justice, Office of Inspector General." She passed the second document to the clerk. "Officer Mercer has engaged in substantially similar petitioning activity in 2 previous jurisdictions. The Inspector General opened a preliminary review 9 days ago." Mercer moved. Just a shift of weight, a small thing. But in the silence of that room it carried the quality of a man who has suddenly found the ground uneven beneath him. Judge Harrington read the page for a long moment. "Officer Mercer, you are present as affiant?" "Yes, Your Honor." Still flat confidence, though something had gone slightly too careful in his voice. A man watching his step. "The court will refer this matter to the Office of Professional Standards. and forward the Inspector General documentation to appropriate oversight. She looked back at the case. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Grounds? Insufficient evidence, procedural irregularity, and credibility concerns regarding the primary affiant. She turned to Daddy, and something around her eyes softened for just a half-second. Mr. Brooks, the court finds no basis whatsoever for limitation of your autonomy or oversight of your affairs. You are free. The gavel came down once, clean, final, irrevocable. Mercer stayed where he was one moment longer than he should have. He was looking at Isaiah, who had finally stood, and the two men held that look across the room with the stillness of people who understand perfectly what has just occurred. Isaiah reached into his breast pocket, removed a business card, and set it on the bench rail. Office of Inspector General is expecting your cooperation, he said, level and quiet, almost conversational. They find it goes better when people don't make them ask twice. He held Mercer's gaze 1 second more. Sir. That sir. Clipped. Cold. The precise formal courtesy of a federal officer informing a man his options have narrowed to one. Whatever color was in Mercer's face when he walked in had begun its retreat. He walked out through the side door, and I watched him go. And I felt something that was not quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. The sensation of a room that has been cleaned out. Of air replacing something rank that you had grown so accustomed to you'd stopped naming it. The aftermath came in pieces, the way it always does. 2 weeks after the hearing, Mercer was placed on administrative leave pending the Inspector General review. Patricia Green's nonprofit lost its city grant a month after that, a review of allocation procedures, the language sterile and final, but gone is its own kind of resolution. Deacon Leon called on a Sunday evening when the kitchen light was going orange. Daddy answered. His side of the conversation was short. I don't need an apology, Leon. I need you to be honest the next time somebody asks you to sign something you know is wrong. That's all. He hung up and picked up the newspaper. And that was the end of that. 6 months after the hearing, Mercer resigned in advance of a formal disciplinary ruling. The Inspector General's report used the words, pattern of targeted exploitation and misuse of public trust with the flatness bureaucratic language reserves for things it finds genuinely alarming. Isaiah came for Christmas. He and Daddy sat at the table after dinner with the tree lights making everything amber and soft, the old chessboard between them, the one with the bottle cap piece, and they played for 2 hours in the comfortable silence of men who had decided, quietly and without ceremony, to stop wasting what time remained being careful with each other. I washed dishes and didn't try to overhear. One morning in early winter, I drove Daddy to the Thursday coffee cart without thinking about routes or courthouse visibility. Gerald the cartman handed me a cup and winked. Extra shot today? You look like a woman who won something. I laughed for real, the kind that rises from the bottom rather than the surface. Daddy took his cup, tapped the lid twice with one finger, and said without looking at me, I told you the cartman burns it on purpose. The coffee was scalding and tasted like nothing I needed to apologize for. The walnut cane still stood by the front door, silver handle up, the wood worn smooth at the grip in a way that maps the shape of my grandfather's hand and then my father's. A record of 2 men who stayed standing when they had every reason to lean. Some mornings I passed it in the hallway and felt its weight in the air even without touching it. Not the weight of age or injury or anything that needed to be overcome. Just the weight of a thing that had been held long enough to mean something. I poured my coffee and sat by the window and let the morning be quiet. For the first time in a long time, it was enough.